Now for Right versus Left is Matthew Galaza. He's back at the table, not left in the corner this week.
And I've been upgraded.
And we've got political commentator Benedict Spence, who's on for the second time, I think, Benedict.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us. This week I attended an event in central London where several MPs got up on the stage and talked about popular Conservative ideas. And we had a very special guest in the audience, Holly Valance, and she said this. Just going to watch this clip right now.
Everyone starts off as a lefty and then wakes up at some point after you start either making money, working, trying to run a business, trying to buy a home, and then realise what crap ideas they all are, and then you go to the right.
So, Matthew, interesting clip there. She says we all start off as lefties, then we sort of grow up and go to the right of politics. You're 48 now. You've not quite got there. You've not quite got there. There is chinks of light. I think sometimes you're more Tory than what I am.
Don't get me cancelled, Lee.
Is Ollie right?
No, I mean, I think historically there has been a case that people move to the right as they get older. It's kind of a cliche of politics. But what's interesting about the current polling is that every age group, bar people, I think, over 70, now showing a majority support for the Labour Party. So it used to be that there was a huge age gap. Yes, younger people are still more likely to support Labour and parties on the left of centre, but it's not where it was. And, you know, one of the things Holly talks about there is when you buy a house that you're going to move to the right. Well, good luck with that, because home ownership is its lowest for half a century under this Tory government. And most people, not just people in their 20s, but people in their 30s and frankly into their 40s, think they're never going to be able to own a home as things stand. So I think it was a truism once, but sadly, well, not sadly, I'm rather pleased about it. It no longer is. But so I'm sad to prove Holly wrong.
I mean, another clouded view there from Matthew. Obviously, he's not quite converted yet. I think he will do one day. Yeah. Do you think he will?
When he gets old enough. When he gets old enough, he will. I mean, if that were universally true, I'd dread to think quite how left-wing Jeremy Corbyn used to be. And actually much of the Labour front bench during that period of time. Yeah. I think that there is some truth in what Matthew says about being a stakeholder in society. If you've got more to lose, actually, I do think you become a lot more conservative, especially also when you have children. You begin to look at the sort of the slightly more experimental aspects of radical left-wing politics, and you think, well, that's nice, but somebody else's children can go through that. I don't want it for me. I do think, though, that there is something that's not being spoken about, and that's that it's no longer about age so much, it's actually about gender. There was an interesting polling done in the FT, I think, a couple of weeks ago, which showed a very clear divergence between men and women in Western societies. Men are becoming increasingly right-wing, and women especially are becoming very left-wing. Now, whether that's to do with, again, not being stakeholders in a more sort of conservative setup, not being married, not having a house, not having children, remains to be seen. But I do think that there are other things, there are other aspects at play here. I do think, though, that you tend to, perhaps not swing to the right, but you tend to mellow. You become, I think, a little more reasonable the older you get, as much as anything else, because you realise, actually, international revolution is a wonderful idea, but actually it's a bit tiring.
Matthew, are you swinging to the right?
No, I've been very consistently in the centre of the Labour Party since the day I joined. I actually, at my first ever Labour Party meeting, called for the abolition of Clause 4, and then it came to fruition under Tony Blair. So my politics have been boringly consistent. I kind of think what you say is sort of, it was true, but we experienced during the Corbyn era, everybody thought it was just, you know, young people joining Momentum. But actually what you saw joining within the Labour Party, you would have experienced this. I mean, maybe they pushed you out, Lee, arguably, is we had a lot of public sector retirees who had wanted a revolution in the 60s when they were young, and now they've got the public sector pensions, who are quite keen on revolution still, and turned up to a lot of meetings.
No, I get that. I mean, it raises a good point, Benedict, because it's true. When Ed Miliband sort of gave the Labour Party away for £3, we had all sorts of these left-wing, I want to call them lunatics, that was re-emerging from the 80s. They'd been activists in the 80s, you know, and now, like Matthew says, probably in the 60s, 70s, retired, got a few quid in the bank. It's quite, you know, it's okay to be, you know, on the far left of politics when your mortgage is paid for, you've got no debt, you've got no worries, and you want to have a go at the nasty Tories.
That's true. Mental illness strikes at any age, and you know, dementia obviously kicks in the older you get. So obviously there's a sort of a sweet spot where you become more right-wing, and then it's dramatically downhill, and you join the Labour Party. You know, I think though, again, we do have to get back to this fact that actually what Matthew says, which is that there is an increasing majority of people that I wouldn't say they necessarily support Labour, but are on the centre-left or swinging further left. And I think you might also see a lot of that manifesting itself in support, for example, for the Green Party. And that's a long-term concern for the Conservatives. Actually, that needs to be addressed. And it will eventually be addressed naturally. There will be a backlash, but will that happen within the sort of the cycle of these politicians, or is it a generational effect?
I mean, what was really interesting was when, after the 92 election, which Labour lost, there were books written about how Labour's women problem. Harriet Harman did a big piece of work about how, because of course traditionally a Labour voter was an industrial worker in a member of a union, most likely, and then obviously when fewer women were in the workplace, women were more supportive of the Tories, and women kept the Tories in power. And now it's the absolute reverse. The sort of peak Labour voter is a kind of a 25-year-old woman now, which it certainly wasn't then, and that's happening across the Western world.
I was brought up in a household, in a working class household in Huthwaite in Nottinghamshire, and most people then would read the Daily Mirror. They'd get their fix from that and probably believe everything they read in there. But now some of those same people, probably like my mum and dad, who are still around. She's a big fan of yours, by the way.
Your mum is a wonderful woman.
But now they read the Daily Express. And so their politics have sort of changed. Their priorities have changed from being a struggling working class family, bringing 3 kids up, to being okay, comfortable, got no debt worries, got own their own house, got everything they need in life, really. So the sort of priorities change, Benedict.
I mean, it's interesting that you cite the Daily Express. Of course, the Daily Express was one of the big papers in support of Brexit, and I think Brexit is something where you see the sort of the traditional left and right divides splintering off. And I do think there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do with deindustrialisation. There's a lot to do with different communities' idea of what left-wing politics looks like. For a lot of people, working class people, they just want to get on in life, and actually they want fairness. And what they see from the progressive sort of centre-left, especially in Europe, also in Westminster increasingly, is a lack of fairness, and that's ultimately what it boils down to. So we can actually sit here and say, well, a lot of people are swinging left, but even within that, I don't think that same, I don't think there's solidarity.
I think it's perceptions, different perceptions of what fairness means from what it did previously.
Let's talk about fairness, Matthew. Let's talk about, I bang on all the time about the immigration crisis, the illegal migration, and fairness, and people that, been born and raised in this country look at the situation currently. I think this is not fair. We see these young men coming over, we're putting them up in luxury accommodation, and now the killer is we see the Church of England, their congregation on a Sunday is swelling. There's hardly any seats left now, and all of a sudden,
but only a church is in the vicinity of asylum accommodation, of a barge or a migrant.
These migrants now are suddenly finding God, finding Jesus, and converting from Islam to Christianity to obviously abuse the asylum system, and that's not fair, is it?
Well, look, I mean, Labour's this week called for a review of how conversions are used in the asylum system, because you're right, it does seem unfair. And I think what's really important for Labour as it moves towards the election and potentially into government is that fairness is at the heart of what it offers. And fairness isn't just economic redistribution, it's seeing that you have a fair go. I'm part Australian, and that's a big thing in the Australian Labour Party.
Is this another bandwagon for Sir Keir to jump on?
I think so. I mean, it's famously Christ walked on water, and he seems to be parked permanently in the middle of the channel, given how many people are converting to Christianity en route. But I do think that there is that ingrained sense of unfairness, which is that certain metropolitan left-wingers like to talk about what Britain owes the world. We owe it to people. And I think a lot of ordinary working class people who are not beneficiaries and were never beneficiaries of empire or industry or anything go, hang on, what exactly is it that I owe? I have been downtrodden my whole life. So have previous generations of my family. What is it exactly that I am supposed to be feeling guilty for and repaying? And actually, if you take a step back and you look at what are the real motivations for mass migration, it's about the suppression of wages, at which point you go, so any idea about fairness really is out of the window. It's about making my lot in life decidedly worse at the benefit of somebody in industry or indeed the government, which is supposed to be
You're going to
serving.
have this big divide in politics between, once you've got 50% of people going to university, and obviously that's now we've had kind of 10, 15 years of roughly 50% of people going to university, and that feeds through. On the one hand, graduates will say that the system is unfair and they're being penalised in taxation. I've got a friend who's been offered a 6-figure job and he's 30s, and he's still going to be paying his student loan off for as far as he could see.
You had so many members of working class families and communities being the first person in their family to go to university, and now look where they are, saddled with the sort of debt that their parents simply could not imagine taking on, and they were lied to about whether or not they would have to take on that debt. They were told, actually, this will be the only interest-free loan you'll take on your life. Oh, good Lord, now I can't actually physically pay it off fast enough. I think that is a huge betrayal, and that was a Labour Party policy. That was Tony Blair.
It wasn't the finest hour of the Labour Party because it put an unnecessary compromise between a graduate tax and this loan system because it wouldn't do anything with the word tax in it.
Let's get some proper answers now, guys. We're going to move straight to the yes or no quiz with Matthew and Benedict. You know how it works, don't you, Matthew?
Absolutely.
Wrong answer. So I'll put that there. No, I'm only joking. Got you there, didn't I?
Remember that I got to do it on you, Lee.
You did. It was a good one. Right, so we'll start with you first, Matthew. Should green levies on fuel bills be optional?
No.
Yes.
Oh, straight difference. Benedict, should we frack our own gas?
Yes.
Matthew?
No.
Oh, clear difference there. Do you support net zero, Benedict?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Different answer each time. Matthew, will Donald Trump be the next president of the United States?
No.
Yes, he will.
Yeah, I think he probably will. This is a killer question. Number 5, Matthew, to you. Do you think that the Church of England are being conned by these illegal migrants who are claimed to be Christians?
Yes.
Yes.
So, 4 different answers, 5 out of 5, by the way, which is good, especially for you, Matthew. Well, look, do you want to come back on one?
Yeah, I mean, on the Church of England and migrants, clearly it just beggars belief that suddenly people who've never had a convert from Islam in their churches are suddenly getting 20 or 30 people converting, or from other religions. So clearly we need common sense. I believe in common sense socialism, and this doesn't seem to be...
Does that exist, common sense socialism?
I think I might write a book.
We're going to find out when he publishes his book whether or not it exists. If I were to push back on one, it would be net zero, simply because everybody wants to live in a green, pollutant-free, pleasant land. That doesn't mean reversing centuries of progress that has lifted millions of people out of poverty to do so.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just on the migrant crisis, Matthew, the Christianity, the converting to Christianity, some good news here. Every cloud has a silver lining.
To use a church phrase?
Rwanda is a Christian country, 96% Christian.
It is, but I'm afraid after the Prime Minister's shameful bet with Piers Morgan on a different channel this week, I think that it's realistic that we're not going to see any Rwanda flights off. I think Piers is going to win that bet.
I don't watch other channels, I only watch GB News. Benedict, last word for you.
Politics is a series of bets made on the outcomes of events. I don't think it was particularly gauche, but I do agree that Rwanda isn't probably going to work, and I think it says rather a lot that a journalist feels that they can be brave enough to actually challenge a Prime Minister on television and say, bet me money on it.
OK, that's another bout of common sense with Benedict. Not so much common sense coming from Matthew. My mother will be watching and shouting at the screen.